Can a simple change in a conduit completely transform the performance of a Formula One car? Today you will discover how Ferrari resolved the mystery of Hamilton's speed in Baku, and why this finding could change the course of his season. Friday morning in Baku started with a tense atmosphere in the Ferrari garage. There were high expectations, yes, but also uncertainty. Lewis Hamilton, the 7-time world champion, reached a treacherous urban circuit such as Azerbaijan, loading not only with the pressure of representing Ferrari, but with the open wound of a season full of unanswered questions. During the minutes before the first free practice, Hamilton's face reflected concentration, but also a slight gesture of discomfort. He knew that something in his car was not quite well from the winter tests, and that doubt quickly became tangible. In the first laps, Lewis reported a lack of confidence when braking. Cryptic but worrying radio messages were heard. The pedal does not respond the same, blocking without notices. I have no touch at the entrance. When the car loses predictability when braking, the entire pilot system falls apart. And even more in Baku, where long lines demand brutal decelerations, and an error can cost the full session. That was what happened. In Sector 3, Hamilton passed just a few centimeters from the ideal braking point. The SF-25 did not respond. And as if fate would like to make it clear, the car hit the barriers. It was not a violent shock, but it was symbolically devastating. Ferrari saw his star pilot be out of combat just in FP1. Hamilton descended to position number 13. The technicians ran to the car, but what was at stake were not only carbon fiber repairs or spoiler change. It was a direct blow to the morale of the entire team. That incident opened a deep conversation between Hamilton and its engineers. The problem was not just physical, it was conceptual. Since he went up to SF-25, the British had commented that he could not find the same level of communication between his left foot and the braking system he had in his stage with Mercedes. But in Maranello, those complaints were not filed, but studied. Telemetry data confirmed that something was not working in the interaction of the brake system with Hamilton's driving style. The thermal distribution, pressure levels in the master cylinder, the temperature modulation in prolonged braking. Each parameter was analyzed with microscope. At that moment, after the error, there were no screams, there were no scolding. There was only silence and science. Ferrari did not look guilty. He looked for answers. And in that technical silence, the opportunity that would transform not only the weekend was born, but perhaps the rest of the season. Sometimes, in Formula One, the performance is not found in the power of the engine, in the energy maps, or in the latest generation aerodynamics. Sometimes, the difference is born in a tiny, almost invisible detail. That is what happened with Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari in Baku. What seemed like a weekend for chaos was transformed thanks to a surgical intervention into a specific component, the cooling ducts of the front brakes. After the coup against the barriers in the FP1, Ferrari's technical team turned completely in the analysis of the thermal behavior of the braking system. It was evident that Hamilton did not achieve a reliable connection with the brakes. What for other pilots is a predictable mechanical sensation, for him it became a Russian roulette. It stopped with uncertainty, not knowing if the car would respond linearly or if it would block without warning. But this is where the true elite engineering appears. Ferrari did not just check sensors or replace damaged parts. In their database they had multiple specific configurations for urban paths such as Baku, where the brakes reach critical temperatures in very few seconds. In that context, they decided to activate a modification they had reserved, an optimized version of the frontal cooling duct. This new design not only improved the airflow to the discs, but rather redirected part of the residual heat to maintain a more stable temperature window during braking. At first glance, it is only a tube with a different air inlet. But for Hamilton, it was like going from handling blindly to night vision. The installation of this duct, executed in record time between the FP1 and the FP2, brought an immediate change. When he went on track, the British began to mark consistent times from the first exit. His confidence level was visible in each action. He delayed the braking without losing the front axle, kept the stable car in the 90-degree zone after the long line, and managed to hurry the limit without exceeding it. In Hamilton himself, the brakes worked for the first time as they should. Finally, I could trust the car when I reached the curves. It was a huge leap. That phrase summarizes more than a technical improvement. It represents a before and after in its adaptation to SF-25. The results were immediate. Time to 41,293, the best time of the FP2. But that number, although spectacular, is not the most important data. The relevant thing is that Ferrari finally had found the formula to unlock the weakest point of the car in Hamilton. And he did it on a track where the margin of error is 0. The interesting thing is that this solution did not appear by accident. It was the result of months of previous work. From the winter tests in Bahrain, the team had detected that heat sensitivity in the front brakes was different in Hamilton compared to Leclerc. Instead of assuming that it was a matter of driving style, Ferrari decided to modify his approach. Each small detail in cooling was analyzed, tested in simulators, and validated in private sessions in Maranello. Baku was the first place where they dared to implement it in a competitive environment. And the result was evident. What seemed like a Friday to forget was transformed into a declaration of intentions. That duct, redesigned millimeter to millimeter, not just cooled the brakes. He also lit a flame inside Ferrari. The flame of technical certainty. The exact point where engineering, talent, and patience cross to create a winning synergy. What many still do not understand about Lewis Hamilton is that their talent is not limited to pure speed on the track. His true power, which made him 7 times world champion, is ability to understand the car as an extension of his body. That sensitivity, almost surgical, has made it one of the most valuable pilots outside cockpit. And in Ferrari, that has already begun to notice. Since his arrival in Maranello, Hamilton has adopted a radically different approach to what many expected. He did not arrive with authoritarian demands or ask to redesign the car to his liking, as some anticipated. Instead, he presented himself as a meticulous observer, willing to integrate into the SF25 DNA before trying to change it. The first thing he did was sit with chassis and aerodynamic engineers to study the car technical package in detail. But he did not do it from a distance as other pilots do. He did it as one more member of the development team. Analyzed each simulation, each telemetry curve, and focused particularly on understanding the differences of behavior between its style and that of Charles Leclerc. There was no ego. There was no internal competition. Just work. Hamilton spent weeks comparing internal data. In particular, he concentrated on the braking areas and the transition between entrance and half curve, where Leclerc used to have a natural advantage. But instead of asking for adjustments to bring the car closer to his style, he did the opposite. He adjusted his way of driving to fit with the dynamic model of the SF25. A decision that required humility, experience, and above all, long-term vision. Lewis has been seen repeatedly working at Maranello's facilities, even in weeks where there was no career. It became a regular in the simulation room, where it faced variables impossible to reproduce on the royal track. From extreme temperature changes, to tests with different aerodynamic load settings, Hamilton helped map scenarios that then fed the strategic decisions of the equipment for each circuit. One of his most shocking contributions was in relation to the rear suspension. Since his years in Mercedes, Hamilton has defended that a good aerodynamic window depends on a stable mechanical base. In Ferrari, he noticed that the rear train design had more potential than it was exploited. He insisted on reviewing the dynamics under average load, arguing that support was being lost in the low-speed curves. His intervention was not anecdotal. He forced the team to reassess one of his most fundamental assumptions about the car. And in Baku, that observation was also validated on the track. This technical leap, based on an improvement as specific as a redesign in brake ducts, not only solved a mechanical failure. He showed that Ferrari has reaction capacity, that can identify problems, analyze them quickly, and act without fear of introducing important changes between sessions. That sends a very clear message to its rivals. This is not the same dubitative team of previous years. This Ferrari is methodical, silent, and increasingly dangerous. But the political and psychological map within the paddock also changes. For rival engineers, what Ferrari has achieved in Baku activates technical alarms. Because if a simple component has unlocked this version of Hamilton, what could happen if the next step is the complete optimization of the rear train or the expansion of the aerodynamic load window? The SF25, which until recently seemed to be at the limit of its potential, could still have several stages of developmentless development. And if this is the level you can offer with just a functional modification, the question that remains in the air is as follows. How much more can this Ferrari grow? And how much more dangerous Hamilton can become now that doubts have left behind? Now that you know the complete story behind Lewis Hamilton's awakening in Baku, the inevitable question is this. Are we facing the starting point of a new era for Ferrari, or has it been only an isolated spark in the midst of an unpredictable season? The change we saw in SF25 was not just a technical change. It was a change of mentality, of philosophy. And that is much more difficult to ensure than any aerodynamic improvement. When a team manages to translate the sensations of its pilot into concrete solutions, When engineering is aligned with the intuition of those who are behind the wheel, then extraordinary things happen. And that is exactly what begins to glimpse in Maranello. Therefore now it's your turn. What do you think of this Hamilton rebirth? Or that they still lack consistency to sustain this trend against McLaren, Mercedes, and Red Bull? I want to read your analysis in the comments.